The NBL Draft has been completed, and because a lot of people don't want to watch 8 hours of everyone picking, I'm going to review all the picks, and all the teams this year's draft, even though the first game is a little more than a month away. This is Sports Hour. What's up, guys? Alexander Thomas here. Welcome back to Sports Hour. This is the NBL review of all the teams and how they did in the NBL Draft. Now, the reason I'm doing this video is because the actual draft itself took approximately 8 hours to do, and also most people do not want to watch 8 hours of this, and it's over 4 nights. So we're going to go ahead and talk about each of the teams and how they did in the actual draft. It's also going to discuss week 1, which starts on February 10th. So it's a little more than a month away. But that's basically where we're going to go ahead. To start off, we have the NBL Draft. The NBL Draft had some great players, had some decent players, had a lot of really good players, and we're going to get to that here. Start off with the teams. First off, the first team to really talk about is the Panthers. And I have the wrong thing up here. The NBL scores. Of course, no one's actually been signed. Most of these players have not been signed yet. So any of these players that are currently all the players that are on the teams aren't actually signed as of right now. They should be signed by the end of January. So start off with the Panthers. Panthers have really developed quite well. We don't know what the Storms are going to get, or the Lindsay or Jean. Zoe Helen was signed by the Carolina Panthers, and she is one of the youngest players ever to be put in the league. She actually is not even old enough to be in the league yet. She'll be old enough the day before the draft starts. Whereas the Panthers do have a decent team, about 88 overall. A little bit more than 88. But as their team roster draft grades put them at a fairly decent 96 overall. Put them, my prediction, a little bit. Put them about a B. They're not the best team right now. They still have a weaker defense. Opening it. The Lions are up next. I'm not gonna look at this because it isn't there. The Lions are up next. And they are also in a pretty good position. They got some good players in the actual NBL draft. They did pretty well in their actual NBL draft position. Their draft grade is a B+. It's slightly better than the Panthers, and think honestly in what they actually went for. They have a slightly worse rating overall, but they do have a slightly better draft grade, which I think means to have a better position at this given time. Lions, of course, are one of those teams that could be really well done. And part of their draft grades does put it. They have a few good players. No one who is potentially leaving after the end of the season. Lions are kind of in a position where they have a stronger rookie class. Not exactly. They actually got a variety of players. They do have a very strong unit that currently puts them at an 87.25, so an 87 overall. They are actually in a position yet. Now, a lot of the players again have not been signed yet, so the signing date is officially January 30th, I believe. Make sure I'm right about that. January 30th is the official first name. We get then the Giants. Giants, I read a B. They actually had a decent draft. There, however, are some concerns I had, which means I couldn't give them an A grade. Giants are, guys, I actually rated them an A minus last season. They have some decent rookie class. They do have some good players. They are now an 89 overall. Their current cost is $48,000. This doesn't actually mean anything right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Giants react this year. Obviously, they didn't have such a great season last season. Last year, they ended up being 3-13. So hopefully they do better this year, and it makes the book a little better. I gave them a better rating this year. I think they do have a good chance. Of course, I have to talk about the actual ratings after the draft and in our video. Bengals, rated them an A. They got a really good draft grade. The Beagles are in a very good position. They got some good players, good hits. They added more of an offensive basis of this actual currents. But the guess is they're going to do very well next season. They have a current for an 87 overall team, so not exactly the best, but they have a very good rating. I currently gave them an A rating. They're they still have a little bit of time to actually function everything together, but once they do that, they will be it. I got the Ethan, I have a B. Not really much to talk about their team because Ethan did pretty decently in the draft, but not great. Their total team is a 6.15, and these are actually got a pretty low rating in their actually overall team. I gave them the B because I do think they have some potential to be good this year. They got some players like Bethany Richardson, which is really a good player. I would say this is a great team. I don't know how well they're going to actually do in the season. Especially since Ethan did only went 3-13 last year, and it's not exactly looking hot for them. I would say they got a good chance. Bobcats have an interesting position. Bobcats should have gone more offensive based. They didn't really have an offensive line or offensive players. They went all defense. So maybe their defense will be one of the better defenses this year's in this year's league, yeah, they kind of needed some better draft picks, I think, honestly. I think they did not do what they needed to do for the Bobcats, and I feel like this means that it kind of give them a luxury rating. I might say they even had a pretty low rating. I'm giving them a B, but I think they are really not a good position. The Otters, runners team, the best team for them would have gone for probably some basic forwards. After the rosters were finalized, the Otters did end up getting some good offensive and defensive players. But I think most of us here in the studios basically stated that they probably needed more of an offensive basis. And unfortunately, they did not get the offensive players they needed. I think we feel like the offensive could have done a lot better. It's just they're losing to their defensive backs this year. They're definitely going to have to go for defense next year. And even with all of that, 89 is not exactly good. 87 is not good. I would say right now they're probably in a bad position. I would say they're lucky to get they're lucky because I give them a B in this case. I think honestly you could probably say they got a C. Cardinals. Cardinals have been absolutely terrible. Looking at the last couple of years, here's the Cardinals. Did really terrible last year, but have done decently well every other year. So it's kind of a position that I'm saying, yeah, they could have done way better. But they're one of those teams that kind of doesn't have a very good position. And as of right now, it's tough to get a good position. They actually made it 22. I'm going to say right now they hang it. I gave them a B because of the context. I do think they got what they needed in their actual roster. But I feel that they're going to have some struggles and still going to struggle this going into this year. They still don't have any really big margins. Geneva, can't pronounce the last name, was probably their best pick, and unfortunately, she is not the right kind of offensive player that they needed. They needed more of a scorer. She is not one of those. Even though she's a 99 overall and she got really good in shooting and all that, she's not a scorer. Her shooting 99 overall became from things really close, and unfortunately, that's not exactly how we're going to do. I'm going to say the Cardinals probably did one of the worst of those teams in here. Tigers got a B minus. Yeah, they just really they were struggling. They were struggling this entire season. They did not get good draft picks at all. Their best pick was Terry Holland, and point guard from the Green team. And yeah, they just did not function well. This team, I think, is going to absolutely be terrible this next year. And unfortunately, they just did not get what they needed. They needed it. They got Madison and Odella, but those players both are not good. And unfortunately, Terry Tillman was the only player they got that actually might have had a decent chance of being good. And looking at their last playoff records from the Tigers, you can see the Tigers have made it quite a bit. They even made it last year, 2 years ago. Unfortunately, they're not in a very good position at all. I do not think the Tigers are going to do well this year. And that's unfortunately sad. Superman got a B. I rated them a B. Yeah, they got actually what they needed, very much so, because there were one of those player teams that I said before this offhand. Um, but then there was something they actually must get some defensive players, and their defensive players they definitely got defense. They got Sarah Noble, one of the best players in the NBL draft in round one. Right? They got Jay Jones, they got Aerosmith. All of those players are really good players. Redcoats is a little bit of a four best thing, so maybe they need to go for an offensive player next year. Here, but with all of those, they absolutely did the best they could. I couldn't quite give them an A. They're pretty close to being they're B plus for me. I say. I don't think they quite got what they need. They did mess up a little bit. I think they needed only go for defense in this position. They ended up pulling forward, which wasn't really necessary. Just to kind of so they have some game, some idea what to do in the game for them. They did really well, not quite enough. I think they needed a little more, especially since they're probably not losing players this next season. So could be anywhere, could be interesting. But their team is very young, and they'll have some interesting rookies this next season. The Ravens. Okay, Ravens got an A, B as well. Absolutely a very good draft pool. They got a pretty wide margin of team players. I'd say they actually probably had one of the better drafts. I would say they're probably 10th in draft position. They ended up having an 85.09, which is 5.09, which is basically 85. Pretty good team. They're losing some offensive players for next season, and they definitely get this chance. I mean, Emi Tamley is definitely a good pick for them. And certain players they got, like Elizabeth Mia, was absolutely a good pick from them as well. I think Ravens did well in their draft. They unfortunately did, however, neglect one big factor. Their last season for them was not great when it comes to the Ravens. Ravens end up getting a basically average rating for them, sadly. And they really needed some better positions. I think they probably need to go for one more point guard, more of an offensive basis. I don't think they did terrible. I think they got a really good position. It just came down to they needed one really good player for point guards, and Amy Tamley isn't enough on her own. We got the Saints. The Saints, I gave an A. They did exactly what they needed to do. 100% what they needed to do in the NBL draft. Absolutely, probably one of the best drafts the Saints will ever have. I will say the Saints did really good off their actual draft position. It was very difficult for me to say the Saints didn't quite, but they got some really good players off of their offense. It's a great point guards. They definitely deserved what the rating I gave them. However, I will say this. I don't think I actually add the Saints to their position. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I didn't. They got 8, 3, 3. I think they actually needed a little bit more to their team when it came to their defense position. They didn't get defense, which they kind of need a huge defensive player. They have a good defense at this time, but their defense is weak. So I think honestly they're going to get scored on a lot, which is the only reason I'm not giving them an A+. I have an A, which is, I think, really, really good position. They got exactly what they needed off of their actual draft. We got the Knights, the team that everyone says should have done a whole lot better in their draft. They got a few really interesting players, but they got defense. Guess what they didn't need? The defense. Now they were more of an average team in that regard, and sadly, I just didn't see them in the context of what they needed to get as a defensive players. It was a little bit weak for me. I would say they could have done better. I could have given them an A rating if they actually had tried to get an offensive player, which is kind of what they needed for last season. Playoff position for them has been pretty average, so they're not actually a bad team. It just comes down to I think they needed a little bit more than this, and I think that's what we're going to have to go with that. The Werewolves, I would have said the Werewolves, when I first thought about this, I thought the Werewolves were doing absolutely terrible, but I think they actually were one of the best drafts. I would say they're probably the best. In the actual NBL draft itself. One of the teams that I think actually did really well. They got pretty good average players, not necessarily it, but they have a really good Han Thomas, who is one of the better players on that team, be able to help and train those specific players. I said that they probably did really well in that. Actually, they got Stephanie Matthews, which is a really good player. Elian in the first round, absolutely good player. This team is going to be pretty young still. I think they got a really good draft grade off of this. And with an 91 overall, I gave them a pretty hit. They're going to be one of the strong teams next season. I did have the Werewolves, and the Werewolves are in a position. I don't know how well had the Werewolves doing, because I won't look at that. Werewolves are one of those teams that have done very well, even though they have been kind of a team that's kind of like hanging on the edge. I think they do really well this year. I'll keep going back to that. We've got the Browns. Browns, I gave them a B. Mostly because I felt that they weren't fully staffed. They got enough good players and all that. But they're losing George K, would be in his last year anyways. Yeah. They're a really young team. And George K is unfortunately not a leader. They got Renna Fox, absolute really good players. But they didn't really draft anything else. They didn't draft any other weapons. Renna Fox is the only player they had as a position weapon, which is kind of like adding Tama Piper to the team advance. They're the only two players that actually have a position that could be, possibly a really good position at this time. But both these players are really young, and unfortunately, they're both not leaders. So George K is going to have to really struggle it out here. They rated A minus last year. I just don't see it this year, so I give them a B. The Techs. I said the Techs were one of those teams that could have done so much worse, and they did absolutely great in their actual draft grade. They actually got an 88 in draft grade. Right. And since they're losing two of their players, pretty much, there's one thing to note is that the Techs have Roy Fox, and the Browns have Brandon Fox, the Brandon Fox, which is sister Brown. So they're going to have two different teams. It'll be interesting to see how those two go out against each other. It's interesting to go with this one. This one's still a very young team when it comes down to this, but it could actually work out well. These are all really good players. Two of them are actually on the same team. Clay Jordan and Ron Phillip were both on the same team regularly, so they actually have know kind of how each other play. I would say that the Techs did really well in their actual draft. I say B for them. They could have done a little better, I think. But considering the Techs haven't really done well in their seasons, the best team there was last season, they're doing better. So I think honestly with this 2 week picks, they could do really well. Moving on to the next team, we have the Huskies. The Huskies are not a new team, really. They're the Westville. The Huskies got some really interesting picks. They got Aislinn in the first round, and then they didn't really do anything else. They got some players that just didn't really fit in their actual scoring outs. They got Indiana Cross, and they got something. But they have only 2 players on their team that are actually good. Aislinn. I don't know how to pronounce it. Is a really good player, but they have only 2 really good players, and unfortunately, who knows? This is a really young team, and sadly, I don't think these brothers are going to be able to hit. They would have to play the entire game, and unfortunately, that's a terrible idea for them to for it to be in actually a good position. I think honestly, with these 2 players, they could do really well. Unfortunately, I had to lower their grade to a C because they're not good in the context of this. I think honestly they have a good team basis, but they just don't have any offensive weapons, and that's what I have to think for them. Dogs. I thought Dogs did really good. The Dogs ended up getting a very good draft class. They got Brandon, Ricky Simon, Sarah Jarrett, and Anita. Yes, all really good players. And honestly, this could change the Dogs' complete schedule. Yes, I would say before, I think I said the Dogs are not going to do really that well. I think the Dogs are actually going to be contenders for the NBL North. They're actually, I think, really, really good players. They just drafted, so they got a great draft class. With that, I could see them doing a whole lot better than they actually is. I actually say they're the closest to A+ that I could give. They're not quite A+. I think they have to figure out who their leader still is, and unfortunately, they're still not exactly in a good position for that position. But I think honestly, this is pretty close to best A they could actually have. The Bulldogs. The Bulldogs They got Claire Dillon. That's really all I can say. Yes, Kieran Barrett was a great player to draft as well, but guess what? She is not a good player in the context of athletes. They got some good players that go onto their team, but the fact is they just have no experience on it. Annabelle Reigns is absolutely killed them last year, and I think honestly, if there's a person to cut, that would be her. It would be her, and sadly, after 2 seasons, it's not active. She's the second worst player on the team. Matt Wilson is actually doing some life, at least going in the right direction. I would say it's going to be interesting to see how this one works. I gave them a B because I felt they actually got some good draft players. Katsuki's not a bad player, but they do need to go function around. And honestly, this could end up being one of their worst years, sadly. The Dragons, one of the teams that has not functioned well. If you look at how the Dragons have done, yeah, they're not good. Okay, look at their records: 110 games, 38.8, which by the way is the third lowest in the actual league. Saints have the lowest before. They have 28 wins, 70 losses, 29 wins, 7 losses. Dragons are not much better. And the context is they did a whole lot better in the draft than they could have functioned for. They got some really good players. They got Noah Emery, Mimi, both really strong players. Gary Sunshine, great player. I think, honestly, with this rookie class working together, this could actually do really, really well. They got Faith Darkwater as a great leader. I honestly think this could be a really strong team. I don't see them doing enough to be able to make it into the playoffs, but they're going to be a really good team this year. I gave them a B. The Jets. I currently gave them a B. Let's take a look at the Jets. Yeah, the Jets have been really good, bad, really good, really good, bad, really good, bad, really bad. So, yeah, they're kind of a team that's going to go interesting on this one. I think, honestly, with the Jets draft class, they didn't really get what they needed. They didn't get a full points. They did not get Winter Fox, did they? We're going to have some problems, I think. There's too many blocks. Oh. I think we have a problem. Can I get a clarification, please? 1 second, guys. I think there's 2 winter boxes. There were a bit of a according to this, there are 2 winter. There's only 1. Who are the 2 got drafted? Browns. Okay, so what happened here is, I think this guy's actually right here. Jets did get. Can I see the roster, please? Okay, what happened here? Because there's a little bit of a problem here. Browns apparently also got her. So actually, we got a little bit of a mess up here. Werewolves. There was apparently a mess up on the actual draft thing here. There we go. So, can I get a clarification, because there's apparently 2 rare foxes. So apparently there was a little confusion here. First one was Silver Wing, which is who it was supposed to be. It's a 96. Which kind of messes up the rating a little bit, but honestly, they actually did pretty decently in the context of action units. I think the Jets actually should have done a little better on Flipkart, but they actually did a pretty decent draft. After all of that, I'd say they have a pretty decent rating. I gave them a B in their actual rating. I think they actually did pretty well. The Lightning and team rosters, they got a pretty average pick, and honestly, I think that's probably the best they could have done. I don't even know what they could have done differently. They got a great first-round pick. After that, there was just really nothing they could have done. They got some decent players off of this. Now, if we look at the playoff record for the Lightning, yeah, they kind of have not. They did decently. They have not done really that well. They actually did really well in the 2020 season, but in the context, they actually got some good players this year. I gave them a B. I think they could have done a little better. UNC, United National Cats. UNC got great players. There's no doubt about that. They actually have a good defensive class, and they got great defensive players. The problem was they kind of need offense. They have one of the worst offensive ratings in the last year's stands, which did put them in the playoffs still, did not qualify, which basically made them miss the playoffs. I think, honestly, they could have done a lot better in their draft picks. I don't think they did terrible. So I'm going to say they got a B, maybe a B minus in their actual draft grade. The Chargers had the number 1 overall pick. And that should have given them an absolute A+. They should have gone literally the best player. I couldn't give them that. I got them maybe a B+ at most. The Chargers got some great players. They got great first selection. Bad news is they kind of are not exactly, they didn't exactly get what they needed. They badly needed some offensive positions. Forwards are not offense. They're kind of in the middle end. They can score, and they're also good at scoring, but they're not the position they need to be, which is why I give them a B. They got a great Imsley first round pick, which is the only reason I gave him a B. Other than that, they did not do really well, and they kind of disappointed me for the actual pick. Not bad. They didn't do bad, but not great. Colts. Yeah, Colts have done terribly. Yeah, so they made the playoffs a couple years ago. They have not done well since. Colts had to cut a player. By the way, they had to cut probably one of the best players, Grace Tomey, who has not yet been signed. She's over here in free agency. Yeah. They got some good players. Bad news. They cut probably one of the best players. Now, the benefits for them are to say that Grace Tomey was probably going to retire at the end of the season anyways. But they had so much more potential by cutting someone who is not a good rating. Maybe like they should have gotten rid of Rada. instead. But no, they got rid of one of the players that was probably going to retire at the end of the year. She would have been in great position to their team. And just looking at their draft grade, I gave them a B plus because they actually still functioned pretty well. But they're really on the edge of not even having a B plus. I give them the B plus because of the rating, and I think they actually do have a really good offensive line. I think they're going to do great, but they do need to actually get defense next year. Dolphins. Yeah, the Dolphins got some good picks. Yeah, that's really all I can say about them. Dolphins have pretty much been terrible every year except for one season, which was back here in 2020. But guess what? So was a lot of their teams. I gave them a B. I think honestly they could even get an F if you want to go for this one. But I'm gonna give them a B because I think they actually got their games. But the rate went down to a C because of the context that they did not get enough forwards. That's just not true. They got enough forwards. There are now 5 forwards. Their rating is a B right now. They couldn't get it. Angels gave them a B plus. The Angels were one of those teams that I think did very well in the draft. They got some good players in the draft, and I think honestly that was probably their best draft class they could even gone for. Their team is a little bit unsure about where we're actually going and what offense means. If they're actually offense, they're defense, they're going to play offense, they're going to play defense, or what they're going to do. They got some good players. So they got a mixture of all of those players. They kind of have a decision here on their hands. I'd say right now they are in a good position at this point. We've got ourselves the Packers. Packers, one of the only teams that did not make playoffs. Yeah. You see that blank right there, that blank right there? There's only 2, 3, 4. There are 5 teams. 1, 2, 3, 4 teams that have not made a playoffs. Now, grant 2 of those teams injured last year, so they can't exactly make playoffs. It's not that they're going to make the playoffs in the first year. Kings haven't made the playoffs yet. The Bears were injured last year. Packers are one of those teams that have been here for a long time. They were founded in 2008. Granted, there were some teams that have been here a lot longer, like, for example, the Huskies or the who have not made any playoff appearances either. Couldn't you please get a better pick? Unfortunately, the Packers did not do that. They got some good players. Problem is they have no function. So maybe next year they'll get a bigger position. I have them at a B right now. I don't think I have much to say about them. All right, the Pirates. The Pirates had the easiest schedule in the league, which means they should have easily got some good players. They got some decent players. They got Auntie Joby in the 4th round. She was supposed to go round 1. She got random going round 4. Great team to great position. No one's probably going to retire this year, and honestly, I think they have a good position in great hands. And honestly, with the easy schedule they've got, they could easily have gone to bigger. I gave them the B because I think they actually might have done a little better by picking a different player, but in the first round. Indians give them slightly better. Indians have had problems. Yeah, they made it back in 2010. One time. And by the way, at that point, let me just say it. They were, what was it? They were 10-8 at that point, which is, by the way, their best season in the history of the NBL. So yeah, they have not been good. Unfortunately, they're probably not going to be good. They have the worst record in the history of the NBL, making it only 2010. I think honestly they could have done a whole lot better. And for me, they couldn't. For the actual roster-wise, though, this is probably their best draft they've ever pulled. They got some really good players. Alexander Harrell is one of the best players in the NBL draft this year, and they got some good cyborgs to kind of support the back stance. I think honestly, they did a really good draft. Maybe they're not going to make it this year, but they've definitely made the try for this year. All right, looking at the Falcons. I would say they were lucky. I think honestly, I might be giving them too much of a benefit. Falcons. Yeah, they got some good players. They have no offense. And the players they got were not what they needed. Dean Destiny is a great defensive back player. It's a great start if they want to add the defense. Jaden is no good on the offensive position. Ella Aris is no good on the offensive position. It's Cameron, no good in the offensive position. It's actually not bad on the offensive position, but she's like 29 points. She's only like 20 points per game. Now, of course, you might think that's really good, except the fact that they play only one quarter, and 20 points is actually really bad in the NBL Junior League. Average points scored is how it is. Average points are actually 29. So 20 points is not good when it comes down to it. She could have done a whole lot better. They could have done a lot better of draft picks. I'm lucky. I gave them a B, but I think I've done better. The Hawks, arguably the worst draft team. The Hawks did not do well. They got some decent players. That's all I can say. They got offense, they got defense, but they have no experience on their team. Reyna is not great. Condrick is not good either. Alexander Little is the best player, to be honest. Even though Tracy Turner has got a much chance. I think honestly with Alexander Little, I think honestly Alexander Little is probably their best player. And they have no support for the actual offense this year. Even though Sabir might be great, it did not really function. I gave them the worst ranks. I think they have the absolute trash for them. And bad news is Hawks were pretty good. They made it this last year, but I feel like they're probably going to be one of those teams that's going to be not great this next year. All right, next team we have the Stars. I'm not going to talk too much about the Stars because they're a new team. Same thing actually the rest of these teams. But the Stars actually I think function well in their context of actually doing stuff. They got some good players. Honestly, I feel like they actually, since they're a young team, they actually might have a good chance of doing something. I think that they might have a little bit of a struggle getting something working because they're stars. Even though they're stars, that does help. Doesn't help the actual position. I think the Stars will do okay, but I don't think it's going to do well enough to actually make the playoffs this year. The Warriors were probably one of the best teams last year. They drafted poorly. Chase is their only player they actually got that was any good in the continent. I mean, Arifa is probably one of the better players in the context of the draft, but she's just not going to be enough. They badly needed some good players to replace players that are losing in the year. Clarice Banks and Natalie Goodman. Both those players are retiring at the end of this season. I think that they probably should have gone for a more offensive position for that. And I think they could have done better. I think that's why I've given them a B. Lynx, I gave B+. They won the Ball Bowl last season, which is the first team, by the way, who's beaten the Panthers in the Ball Bowl. Yeah. Since 2016, anyways. The Lynx, I think, did function pretty well. They got some good picks and they got some good draftings. There's not much to say about them. I think they could have, concentrated a little more on their actual offense, which would struggle a little bit last year, but I think they did pretty well. The Leland Cats, I think, got way too much help. They got a lot of players. Their draft class is kind of shuffled, which means they're going to have a little bit of a struggle. They're one of the new teams. They needed some more defensive players. They got defensive players, but not enough to actually function as an actual team. Sure, Loon Cats did, in fact, make it to the playoffs last season, but unfortunately, they needed a little more than they actually worried for. I think they actually need some more defense, and they didn't quite get what they needed for the defense position. I give them an XP. The Bears, I got an A- for them. Why? Well, the Bears are one of the few teams that, of course, have not actually made it to the playoffs. Granted, they've only had one season, so they haven't had any chance to prove it. But, you know, they've been in real for a little while. They haven't yet. They got some good players, and I think, honestly, the draft class they got was it. Jared Rippon was a great player. Same with Noah Silas, absolutely great player to use this. And I think, honestly, they got some good draft picks, and I think that's going to be helpful to them next year. They are young teams. I think they're still going to struggle a little bit, but I think, honestly, they had one of the best drafts in it. We then have the Kings. I probably should just give Kings an F. No. They actually did really well in the actual draft. There's not much to say about them. They actually got great players, and they are a great team. Don't know how well they're going to do in the draft because they're still a pretty young team. Then we got the Foxes. The Foxes are one of the better players. Teams, did terrible in the actual draft. They are super young. They have no experience. Unfortunately, I had to give them a B. And I think they actually probably deserve lower than a B. The only thing I'm going to say is they actually did get some good weapons, and I think they actually have a good position. I don't think they have a great draft overall. The draft was not good, but maybe with a little more experience and actually of players, maybe they'll assign a player that will actually do well for them. Then finally, the Legends, the team that was predicted to win the NBL North. I gave them B. They did really well in the draft. I will say they are one of the young teams as well, but seriously, they actually got some really good players. I would say right now, the NBL Draft, the Edge is probably one of the better of it. The only thing is, they kind of went off. They didn't do well after the first round. I think they got some good players, but I think they got more coming in. Let's then now. That's pretty much all for the actual. I think about the NBL draft. The one thing was talk about week 1. This is week 1. There's the times, and I'm showing you week 1. Now, if you want to take over one of these teams, you still can do so. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them. It would be actually an interesting position. What do I think in each week 1? I'm not going to go with this, what I think week 1 yet. But looking at everything, right now, I'm going to talk about the division. Who I think actually wins each of the division after the draft. I think there are quite a lot of players in it. Who I think is going to make it? Who is going to win the division? I think the Legends are still going to win the division. The playoffs teams are going to be the Dogs, and sadly the Panthers are going to miss the playoffs for the first time. They're going to be just out. This team here, this one is, I'm going to say the Foxes don't do it. I will say the Hawks and Ravens both make playoffs. I'm mostly only choosing two of these teams. Looking at this one here, I give the Bears making it this year. I'm going to give the Pirates making it. That's because they have the easiest schedule. And finally, I will say of these teams here, the only team I think actually has a chance of making it is the Browns and the Saints. I think these are the actual players. I think the Panthers are going to miss the playoffs, and they're going to be like at the edge. Those are the players I think in the NBL that are actually going to make it to the playoffs. Those are my predictions. Not saying that's what happens and all that. On the other side, I give Leland Cats, and that's all I can really say. I can't say any of these other, and probably the Werewolves. I will go with the Werewolves here. I think Werewolves is the team if tips, but I can't even give the Werewolves a prediction because they are kind of in a bad position. I give everybody makes the playoffs on the end, except for the Warriors. I don't think the Warriors are going to make it. The Warriors are going to kind of choke. Packers are actually going to make the playoffs. No, they're. I have three teams making the playoffs in that regard. I will have the Stars. I will have not any team actually making the playoffs in this division. No team makes the playoffs. I will say the Supermen probably make the playoffs off of this regard. And you know what? I can't give any deer sort of teams acting. I think the Huskies are going to just miss. Then in this division, I give right now the Tex division at this time. I'm going to go with saying that the Bobcats also make it in. UNC is going to just miss it this year, and I think those are my predictions for these. Now, granted, there's one more team. Who do I think is going to make it of these teams? And I got to go with UNC being the next best team. But those are my predictions for who I think it's. Those are my predictions. We'll see after the weeks, and I'll actually go back and talk all the way when I get to week 16 or week 14 or something. The actual predictions will be put up in week 12 at that point in time. That's all for Sports Hour. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to keep your game on. And I'll see you guys in the next video.